Hi, and welcome to the next episode in the evolution of data centers with AssetView. Today, I'm joined by John Davis, a DCIM subject matter expert over at Sunbird. John, thanks so much for joining us today. Appreciate you taking the time.
Well, thank you, Lori.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, one of the topics we really wanted to cover in this episode was the importance of periodic audits related to security, efficiency, operations, and asset management in the data centers. You're in the industry, you're an expert on the subject matter. What are you seeing out there? What are the challenges?
Well, related to what AssetView does, having a good baseline of asset data to populate a DCIM and then reconcile periodically, it's a very manual process unless you have a system in place, some automation strategy like barcoding or active or passive RFID. And so what I'm seeing out there is adoption, going from no tool to perform your asset audits to something, either it's barcode, lowest cost, or perhaps a next step up being passive, next step up being active. I don't see a lot of active for asset in the data center.
Okay. You see that adoption component right now, as far as introducing kind of this idea of technology to kind of help with this audit piece. What do you think, some of the hurdles are right now? What do you think? It's kind of an adoption period right now. Do you see a lot of people doing it manually and out there counting things and tracking things? How's it handled currently?
How's it handled currently? So I think right now at this point it's 50-50. They'll have some type of automation tool, again, like barcode or RFID.
Yeah.
There's some very large enterprises we deal with that are using clipboards and they're identifying host names on a sticker. The most human intensive way to do an audit, but it's still being done that way with an understanding we've got to stop. We've got to find a better process because there's so many facets of this that asset audit touches, security being one of them.
Yeah.
You don't know what you have, you're not secure.
One of the things that you're observing, obviously, is this manual portion. What AssetView brings to the table is the ability, obviously, to streamline this a little bit better for people to get away from the clipboards and the reading of tags, because it's really labor intensive, right? And I'm sure everyone really looks forward to when audit time comes around, because who doesn't want to go out there and count all their things? So obviously, getting all of this data, having all this data is really important. How would this data then be leveraged, with the audit data that's then utilized in like the DCIM? How do you guys kind of work on the Sunbird side to kind of, where does that benefit kind of work for a DCIM provider like yourself?
Well, an audit baseline of assets, that's the starting point to create a model, populate the model in DCIM. Without that, you're not going to have that model. So typically our data that we stand our systems up with is coming from a CMDB or a spreadsheet. Well, how did it get in there? It had to start somewhere, and that's going to be an audit system.
Gotcha.
And so how is that used? That's going to be used for periodic reconciliation after we create the baseline.
Gotcha. When you go into different data centers now, how and you get perhaps that spreadsheet. Do you find that it's pretty accurate? Does it depend on kind of when it's been done?
No, and we've made quite a business out of doing manual audits because the data just does not have integrity. That's half the reason that sparks someone to have an AssetView solution or a DCIM solution.
That's a lot we're seeing out there. And I think, to your point, if you don't know what you have, there's the errors that can be just in a manual process. Some of just the manual errors that can occur. I know you mentioned, like, when you come in, you find that the data isn't always great. Do you find that after you kind of have worked with people and do this initial audit for them, that they kind of realize, like, oh, maybe we should use a different solution, or we should do this more often?
Yeah, so when there's nothing in place to automate the data collection, it's very obvious because there's a time component, there's a cost component. And often behind us is going to be more of an automated solution. We'll go in there and maybe we'll barcode, or we'll asset tag with RFID. Typically, we're asked to do the manual work, and then someone comes behind us with a better solution once they recognize the benefit of automating this type of thing. And I keep saying, like RFID is automation. It absolutely is. I don't have to barcode scan every individual asset.
Yeah.
This all relates to change control, and so
Mhm.
I push change control through a DCIM using the data that formerly came out of, let's say, an asset view or any other system.
Mhm.
And we reconcile that periodically. And if I don't have an automated piece of instrumentation like RFID, like we're
Mhm.
back to manual again, we're back to mistakes, we're back to human intervention and human glue.
Mhm. From a security standpoint, and I don't know if you run into situations where things have kind of they thought were there, weren't there, or something that was moved in somewhere that it shouldn't have been. If you run into those kind of like security issues or concerns, and
Yeah, and that's often a driver for adoption. I can't use specifics, but there's been exploits on some platforms, and they could not tell. They could see a platform online, but they did not know where it was at, just
Mm,
because of the network structure they had. And
gotcha.
so they needed a better way to identify where these exploits might lie. Uh, and so that's one of the uses that for a combined asset audit system and a DSIM.
So in that scenario, you could actually see like where it was reading that was on the network. Is that kind of the idea? But they didn't know where the physical location of
Yes,
the hardware
to
was.
remediate exploits took much too long for the CTO and the head of security's liking, because those exploits stayed in the wild until they identified where the assets were.
It's a massive undertaking to manage these data centers. And I think solutions like Sunbird's DSIM makes it incredibly more easy, to do that. But there's still the human intervention piece. There's still things that move around, switches and servers that move from row to row and room to room, rack to rack. And I think a lot of people can probably relate to the headache that it is to ensure all of the stuff is where it needs to be. So as far as, asset management kind of as a whole goes, and you're seeing out there, if you were in a data center today, if you're running a data center today, and you realize that there's a problem, but you've got to convince other people that this is the solution needs to be addressed. What are kind of some of the things that you'd bring up to other individuals in the company that say, I really think we need this? What pain points do you think you could address with kind of the higher ups to say, like, I think this will solve XYZ problems?
There's security component, absolutely. If you
Yeah.
don't know where your assets are, you're going to have a problem with remediating exploits. The same with there's a financial component to this. You have to know where those assets are, what
Hmm.
resources they're consuming, and a planning component of this. We need to know what resources are in any space before we deploy those assets. And there's no reason why those shouldn't be tagged so we can follow them through an entire life cycle, whether there is a human inspection or a machine inspection with an RFID scanner.
Yeah. Anything else you wanted to kind of add on, John, as far as DSIMs in general, data centers and asset management or security?
Yeah, so let's talk about the point of resolution that you can provide. So you can tell us what rack an asset landed in or what
Sure.
rack it was moved to.
That's correct.
And
Yeah.
so that's maybe what portal it left through. So
Yeah.
those things are then alerts that we reconcile within DSIM. And that is a key use case that we haven't covered yet. So
Yeah.
if I know where an asset is, that missing piece is the rack unit. Well, DSIM can provide that, whereas an RFID system like AssetView provides the ultimate rack and location. So
Correct.
we just keep moving closer and closer in resolution to where that asset is. And maybe one day AssetView will figure out how to give us rack level resolution when an asset enters the rack
Are
without
you
it being
level?
powered. That
Are-
would be the holy grail now, wouldn't
that
it?
would be the holy grail. Yeah. No, yeah, absolutely. Thank you for the plug there. Yeah. But yes, asset view obviously will give you the ability to track those assets throughout. And I think to your point earlier, John, when you're talking about the initial the audit and doing those audits on a regular basis, when you come in to know what you have, I think what Asset View can really do is streamline that audit process for you on a regular basis. So if you're trying to do these quarterly or biannually or annually or whatnot, and you're having to pull team members off and you're having to spend man hours and time and money to do these. Asset View does have a system that'll automate this process for you. In some cases, we have clients that use the real time solution and read those rooms in racks and rows every hour, every 10 minutes, every few, whatever that interval cycle is.
Right.
It just depends. Or maybe it's once a week, maybe it's once a month, whatever it is, just to give you kind of that real time visibility. And we have some other locations where people will say, look, I have the manpower, but we'd like to speed up this process. And we'll give them a handheld. And the really cool thing about passive RFID, as opposed to barcodes, which people I think are more familiar with, is the read range for a handheld scanner to an RFID tag is like 6 to 8 feet. And it reads incredibly fast as opposed to a barcode scanner. So I think there's a lot of advantages to a system like this. I think for data center managers and directors out there that hate when audit time comes around or are just concerned
Yeah.
about security where things are, or just keeping a handle on the massive amount of assets that they're personally responsible for. A solution, an integration between a DCIM and a solution like Asset View just makes a lot of sense. From that.
Yeah, let me offer an anecdote. We've had
Yeah.
engagements that we had to take literally years to complete audits. That was while we were tagging. I don't know if it was RFID, but we were tagging the assets. And then
Mhm.
we shaved the reconciliation. You shave years off that. You never have to do that again.
Mhm.
And so whenever you're doing an audit in mass to get into DSIM, it's the perfect time to introduce RFID because you're already touching the system. And then
Yeah.
you'll never have that multi-year long effort again.
Nope. Save time and money in the long run for sure. That was everything I had for us today, John. Did you have anything else that you wanted to add before we wrap it up for today?
No, I think we covered the waterfront pretty well. I am very optimistic that we're going to have a very large uptake of these automation systems like Asset Views RFID because it powers our system. So
Mhm.
we're just pushing data around on the capacity planning and asset side. We need that automation piece or else our value is not as strong in the market.
Right. Well, thank you.
We need you.
Thank you. Absolutely. Well, I want to thank you so much for your time today, John. Please feel free to reach out to John if you can be of any assistance regarding DSIMs. He is a subject matter expert over with Sunbird, and we really appreciate his time today. And if any other questions on Asset View, I'm Lori Gebert. I assist with sales at Asset View here. Feel free to reach out to me as well. Thanks so much. Take care.
Thanks for your time, Lori.